Well, welcome back to Straight Talk. I have a very special guest here today. You all know him, but he's going to give us some really great information that I have found interesting. Just dealing with Simmons College, and then it just popped in my mind: where are they going? Because as I got closer and closer to the process, I said, these guys are going someplace. They're doing creative stuff. They're doing it. We need to know about this because one of the things I've learned is that it is of the community, but not just of the community. It is integrated into the future of where our community goes. I'm talking about the Black community, but guess what? I'm also talking about the broader community. And we're going to put it into context today because I'm going to skip all the other stuff. We're going to get right into it today. Look here. I have as my guest, and you know who he is, Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Crosby, the president of Simmons College. You know him as the senior pastor, the head pastor of St. Stephen's Church. And we know all about St. Stephen's and what it does and all that. But Simmons College, we're going to get into that today. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be with you. Good to see you, my friend.
Well, I tell you what, we spoke the other day. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, and you revealed some things to me that just said to myself, I said, some more folks got to hear about this. They got to hear it, and they got to hear about it consistently. In fact, we're going to start today talking about this, but I got to get your agreement that when something big happens, you're going to give me a call and say, hey, look, we got to get this out there because I want to be in a mix of informing the public, my listeners, okay?
If it's big, it's probably because you're helping to make it big. And so many things that we've already have had expire is because of your input, your participation. I'm thinking of Senate Bill 270, which was historic.
And we're going to get into that.
Yeah. Okay.
So you too kind. We talked about Simmons and your work at Simmons. I'm not gonna let you do that to me. Come on, but 270, that was a good way to segue because we can get into that. In fact, why don't we just go straight to 270 because 270 is a game changer, I would say.
Yeah.
270. You explain 270 to us.
Well, most of us, when we think of Simmons, and we are reimagining what Simmons can be because we are rediscovering what Simmons has been. And Simmons began in 1879 for one primary reason, and that was to develop what was called then a normal school, which is a teacher's college. And that is because out of enslavement or slavery, 1865, only 5% of Blacks were literate. And before the public sector began to develop schools for Black literacy, Blacks had already taken the initiative to develop their own schools independent of the public sector. Simmons was one of those institutions. And it was started for the purpose of teaching teachers to help promote Black literacy. That's 1879. So this year, because of Senate Bill 270, Simmons now is back into the business of training teachers for public schools, private schools across the state of Kentucky. So we'll be able to develop a teacher education program and to prepare the next generation of teachers. And that's important because historically Black colleges and universities are only 3% of the colleges in America, but yet they produce 50% of all of the Black teachers and public school personnel in the United States of America.
Hey, and I'm here to testify because I am a product of an HBCU.
Yes, sir.
But Simmons, it had a journey. I mean, 1879, that's shortly after the Civil War ended.
Right, correct.
It was right in the throes of what started off as a hopeful period in Reconstruction, but which was reversed
Absolutely.
basically. And the fruits of that never were realized fully yet in 1879.
If you look at the cornerstone on the 18th Street campus, it will
Yeah.
say 1865, not 1879. And the reason why
Okay.
was because Kentucky formed the first Black Baptist convention in American history for the sole purpose of establishing Simmons. They started at Fifth Street Baptist Church. But they put their money in the Freedmen's Bank, and the speculators lost a lot. In fact, all of the money that Black people had put in that Freedmen's Bank because of no securities was lost. And so Simmons lost a lot of its money. So they had to rebound from that tragedy. And that's when they started in 1879.
Well, I'll tell you, so that was, it was born out of challenge.
Yes.
Is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
And yet it's had a journey to get to where we are now.
Right.
And without even blinking an eye, I can say there were multiple challenges along the way. Could you allude to some of those?
Well, as I said, it started off the Freedmen's Bureau Bank failed. So that was a tremendous challenge. 1879, that's 2 years after 1877, with ends Reconstruction, with the Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel Tilden Compromise. So you have the country betraying Black political aspirations and equal protection under the law. So it was the nadir, that begins the nadir of Blacks suffering post Civil War. Yeah. And then, of course, in 1904, you had the Day Law that was passed, which actually helped Simmons, because the only schools that provided liberal arts education was Simmons College. At this time, Kentucky State did not.
And the Day Law was when they passed the law that said that Black and white students could not be educated together.
In fact, Simmons had an extension. Correct, you're totally right. That was in 1904. And Simmons had an extension school in Bullitt County. And the Day Law was targeting Berea College, which had integrated education. Right. So the Black kids at Berea and the Black kids at Simmons Extension School, Eckstein Norton in Bullitt County, merged and produced the school in Simpsonville, Kentucky, called Lincoln Institute.
Right. Okay, so Simmons was in that mix.
It was in that mix. If anything related to education, if you look on the cornerstone of our building, for example, you see all these prominent names.
Right.
Like the trustees. One is got, if you look, it's right there on the cornerstone, H.C. Russell, Henry Russell. And there's a community in Louisville called the Russell community.
Right.
Well, he's on the cornerstone of our building because he was one of the trustees. So anything of significance, Simmons is somehow in the mix historically. The problem is, it is a history that has been bleached out of our consciousness and bleached out of our memory, which is unfortunate, because history, you study history to learn its lessons. You study history to be inspired by its accomplishments. You study history in order to replicate its achievements. And we lost that history. So we lost a whole history of iconic men and women who could have been a tremendous source of inspiration. Just about 2 weeks ago, Nannie Helen Burroughs, right there at where the Greyhound bus station is on 7th Street, they unveiled a historical marker for Nannie Helen Burroughs. Nannie Helen Burroughs, the great Nannie Helen Burroughs, she's one of the most celebrated women in Black history, was here in Louisville, Kentucky for 20 years. Now, she's in terms of if you go to Washington, D.C., everything is Nannie Helen Burroughs. And they just unveiled that historical marker, but no one knew anything about Nannie Helen Burroughs or this rich history that is Simmons College of Kentucky.
Wow. Wow. Well, Simmons had other challenges. In fact, when I look at the new Simmons, the Simmons under your leadership now, it was, from my view, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, it looked like a rebirth, an expansion.
It is a rebirth. And the challenge Simmons had was the challenge that Black people have, and that is the lack of wealth, the lack of endowment. When President Biden spoke to the Congress, he talked about HBCUs. And he said that we must get behind HBCUs because HBCUs don't have endowments. For example, there are 101 HBCUs. The total endowment of the 101 HBCUs, all 101 schools, is $3.4 billion. Now, to help you understand how minute that is, Harvard alone has $40 billion in endowment. Wow. So one school has more endowment money than all 101 historical Black colleges and universities combined.
So let's put that in context a little bit. All of that lack of capacity, the disparity that you just outlined between Harvard and then all of the HBCUs are out there are directly related to the legacy of slavery.
Slavery and
all that there came out.
Semi-slavery, yeah. Jim and Jane Crow. You're totally right. And you mentioned one of the 5 C words of W.E.B. Du Bois when it comes to education. He said in 1935, and that's capacity.
Yeah.
He said what Black kids need, they need teachers who are competent. They need teachers who are C-word compassionate. They need a curriculum that is relevant for expanded capacity. That's the 4th C word, capacity. The 5th C word he mentions is connections, to overcome social isolation. He said, if you get those 5 C words down, he said, that is the recipe for academic achievement for Black kids.
Well, I'm going to tell you that there's 2 of those C words I want to delve into a little bit. And one is I want to get into more capacity, which takes us back to a discussion about Senate Bill 270.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about curriculum, because right now, as we speak, across this country, there is this reactionary piece, but I would call it racist on its face to me, piece, an anti-democratic move to actually teach a false history instead of teaching a liberating real history of who and what we are, where we came from, and what our relative roles were, which lays the foundation for how we liberate ourselves in meeting the future.
It's mythology, it's not history.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's white mythology.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna come back to that one because that's a deep discussion. I don't want to get too far from Simmons here just for a second. I opened that door. I apologize, but I'm coming back.
That's a very important point. And that's why Simmons exists.
Yeah.
Because Simmons exists in order to teach that history.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's my point. But I think we're gonna come back and get on that a little bit. But back to Simmons. So this rebirth that we've all been witnessing, over time, had to have been tough.
It's
even
been
to
tough.
this point.
It's been tough. In fact, 1929, you talked about challenges. 1929 was a difficult year. That was the year the stock market crashed. And when the stock market crashed, Simmons, the buildings that are on our campus, we lost our campus, foreclosure. And the University of Louisville purchased the campus. And under President Raymond Kent, and Raymond Kent said, and I'm quoting Dr. Lawrence Williams, who was the historian for Simmons College. No one has written more about the history of the school like Dr. Lawrence Williams.
He was an old friend. Yes.
Brilliant man.
Brilliant scholar.
He quotes, I think he's quoting Blaine Hudson, but he's quoting Raymond Kent, who said that we should close Simmons because it's a poor excuse for a university. Now, he totally omitted the fact that the black middle class was born because of Simmons. There is no, all the doctors, all the educators, all the scholars, NAACP, everything, all the lawyers, the, Buchanan versus, what was that in 1917?
Was it Worley?
Worley versus Buchanan.
Yeah.
Well, Worley was a member of the, he graduated from Simmons Law School. Okay. Yeah. So the first case the NAACP won before the Supreme Court, Worley versus Buchanan. Well, Worley was a proud member of not Howard University's law school, like Thurgood Marshall, but Simmons Law School. Simmons was the only black college in America that was black owned, that had law school, medical school, liberal arts college, teachers college, that was black owned and named after a black man. Howard was a white man. Spelman was a white man. Morehouse was a white Baptist preacher. Simmons was a black man. It was the personification of black power.
Yeah.
And they wanted their own school because they wanted the right of self-determination.
Let me stick a pin in the Worley versus Buchanan just for a second, because that was the case that dealt with restrictive covenants, if I recall correctly, right. Where they could prevent an African-American, for instance, from purchasing a property because he was African-American. And that was that case that was taken to the Supreme Court that overturned that restrictive covenant piece. So that's significant. And that individual came out of Simmons.
It's significant because NAACP started in 1909. You know the story, Niagara movement gave birth to them. And they call it the Niagara movement because they had to have the meetings in Niagara because Du Bois and them couldn't rent hotels in New York.
Yeah. Wow.
So you have the Niagara movement, and then you have the NAACP 1909. What? 8 years later, the first case the NAACP takes to the Supreme Court is Worley versus Buchanan.
Yeah.
Worley was a Simmons graduate.
Wow. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the point being, for Raymond Kent to say Simmons was a poor excuse for a university, he should have said, no, America is a poor excuse for a democracy. Because it is the absence of democracy that made Simmons necessary. And they did a phenomenal job. They made bricks without straw, as black people have always had to do.
Yeah. Well, let's step that a little bit further. So now we've come through that particular period, but we're approaching, and you've outlined, it went through bankruptcy or something of this nature. University of Louisville bought the assets. What happened from there?
They turned Simmons campus, because of the day law, into the segregated division of U of L called Municipal College.
That building is on the property where Simmons is now. Is that correct?
Right. That's where Municipal.
7th in Kentucky.
That's right. So Simmons built it. Black men's names are on the cornerstone to this day. Enslaved black men. Charles Peirce Sr., father of Charles Peirce Jr., who integrated not only the University of Louisville faculty, but was the first black faculty member of any major Southern university in American history. Well, he was a product of Simmons.
Wow. There we go again.
He was a product of black people. So they did two things. They took over the campus, started Municipal College for Negroes on our campus, and then wrote a provision that we forced us to agree with, namely that a no-compete clause, which says that Simmons could not provide liberal arts education. And the only education Simmons could provide in the agreement was theological education.
So let me get this straight. So prior to that time, Simmons was not only doing theological teachings, but was a liberal arts institution. Is that what I'm hearing?
Simmons University.
Yes.
The only department that survived after the University of Louisville took over everything. For example, how do you explain the fact that the Delta Sigma Theta chapter of the University of Louisville is one of the oldest Delta chapters in America? It's a single digit Delta chapter. How do you explain that? Because they didn't start at U of L. They started at Simmons, like the Sigmas.
Here we go again.
They started at Simmons. When they took over our campus and our programs and our teachers and everything, they brought it all over to municipal, which was University of Louisville's segregated division. That's why the Deltas are so old, because they couldn't be that. I mean, U of L didn't have blacks on the campus until 1951.
That's right.
So they took over everything and then mandated the only thing you can teach is theological education. So they took, this is why we made it. They took everything from us, but God. They didn't have everything. We was gonna leave you God. And
the irony of that.
When God's all you got, God's all you need.
Got you.
So that's what they did to us. But here, this is what happened though. We never closed. We played our music with just one bowstring. We used to have 4 bowstrings, but white supremacy clipped it. White supremacy clipped it. We had 1 bowstring. That's the theological department. That's how Simmons came to be known as Simmons Bible College. That's white supremacist naming. And that's my biggest challenge in my early years at Simmons was to get the preachers to quit calling Simmons what white people told you to call it.
Yeah.
To be more aspirational. It was never the dream of the founders to start a Bible college. They wanted to start a university with multiple departments. So you may have a religion department, but you also have a mathematics department. My grandfather, who was a graduate of Simmons, who's the founder of St. Stephen Baptist Church, who baptized me as a child. My grandfather graduated from Simmons with a degree in mathematics. So he was a math whiz. He was a geometry major. He knew, so they taught, it was a liberal arts school. My grandmother, who taught in Jefferson County Public Schools until 1980, she was a graduate of Simmons College.
Yeah.
They trained teachers. We just don't know the history.
Now, let me make an observation. So now we have slavery. That's a structural, systemic racial manifestation. We know about Jim Crow, and we know that separate but equal was memorialized in Plessy versus Ferguson. We come forward in Kentucky with all of that, and under the Day Law, ironically, Simmons catapulted further or forward, despite the fact that that was a systemic piece of doubling down on racist and segregationist philosophy and structures. You come forward, and we know that the weight of slavery, the enslavement I like to call it, but I'm gonna call it slavery, and all that came up to that point, this compromised capacity of Black folks across the country, including Kentucky, that reverberated negatively towards Simmons. It ends up in a financial vice. Then we come forward, and when University of Louisville takes it over, structurally, all these structures now have hemmed it in. And it had that one lifeline that you're talking about, the most significant lifeline you can have. And it goes forward. I'm tracing all the systemic and structural manifestations that, notwithstanding, still survive, but still has relevance to what's happening today. And I jump forward a little bit, just a little tweak in Senate Bill 270, because there is a structural piece that says, okay, we recognize there's a little piece, because all that stuff is compromising Simmons, and now something has happened. I know it's not the panacea, but it's certainly there was something that's good that came on the scene at that particular time. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well,
270.
It's really a form of reparations in a very minuscule way. Because when we think of reparations, don't think exclusively about just closing the wealth gap. There's some other gaps we have to close too, which is repair. You have to close the image gap. I don't have a good image because my image has been desecrated by 400 years of anti-Black marketing. We've got to repair Black image. Second part of reparations, we have to repair the narrative, which is what the 1619 Project is attempting to do, which you started off talking about, because the narrative is wrong. And reparations, part of reparations that they're fighting against is reparations to repair the narrative of the 16 of America as being this egalitarian, democratic society in which slavery and Jim Crow was just incidental to American life and development. No, it was central.
So I think what you just said has got to be central to the mission of Simmons.
Yes, it does.
What is the current day mission of Simmons?
It is to educate, to help Black kids discover their undiscovered self. All of us have an undiscovered self, and the goal of Simmons is to introduce you to your undiscovered self. Secondly, it is to infuse in you so much confidence that you're borderline arrogant. Because one of the effects of white supremacy is that white supremacy undermines your dignity. And we're trying to create dignitarians. I believe in dignitarians. So it undermines your dignity. It undermines your sense of self-worth. You internalize white supremacy, and you have this psychological bifurcation where you don't believe that you can compete. And Simmons is designed to infuse in you a sense of what Martin Luther King Jr. called somebodyness. When Dr. King was on the Merv Griffin show in 1967, Merv Griffin asked him, he said, what is the greatest legacy of the civil rights struggle? He said, without question. He said, it is infused in the Negro a sense of somebodyness, something that he has needed all along. It made Black people, he said, straighten your backs up because no one can ride your back unless it's bent. Having your back down is not humility, it's bad posture.
You know what that sounds like to me, what you're articulating? Could you try again? It sounds to me like a liberation construct, an empowerment construct in terms of the mission. That's core to the mission.
Yes, it is.
So it's not just education for education's self.
No, sir. It is mission, and it is to create Black kids who are what, and here's the phrase that we once used at the turn of the century, 20th century, race men, race women, not racial diplomats.
Yeah.
There's a difference. Race men, a racial diplomat is concerned with reconciliation without repair. You cannot have reconciliation without repairing Black people. So a race person is somebody who unapologetically is saying that Blacks are the victims of 400 plus years of injustice, and that we must advocate for Blacks and repair Blacks in those three areas: image, narrative, wealth.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I think it's obvious that if you don't repair, then you are structurally in a framework of a disadvantage. You're automatically maintaining disparity.
Absolutely.
There has to be repair. You can do self-repair, or someone else has broke it, has to repair what they broke, or maybe it's a combination of them, but there must be repair.
There must be repair. And you cannot get to the wealth repair until we have the courage to deal with the narrative.
Yeah.
And that's what we are afraid. We are afraid of the narrative. Yeah. They call it patriotic education bills that they're trying to pass across, the 1776 bills. Let me tell you what it really is. It's really nothing but white fragility bills.
Yeah. That's that attack on the 1619 piece. Yes. That's North Carolina, the University of North Carolina refusing tenure.
Yes.
To the journalist, the author, the scholar.
Yes.
By all measures.
Yes.
But a political statement was made to preclude her from that rightful prize, so to speak.
Right.
And now across the country, because I think it's very important to talk about this, and I think we got it mounted in Kentucky, because it would not surprise me to see that narrative become part of the discussion going forward.
Do you remember, and it's, I don't mean to digress, but it's a good, do you remember the original movie, Planet of the Apes?
Oh, yeah.
Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
When you have this topsy-turvy world where primates control humans, there's a phrase in the movie repeatedly called the forbidden zone. And they said, do not go to the forbidden zone. Both primates and humans were told, don't go to the forbidden zone. At the end of the movie, Charlton Heston and his girlfriend are on a horse on their way to the forbidden zone. And someone asked one of the primates, what will he find in the forbidden zone? And the primate said, he will find his destiny. When he gets to the forbidden zone, he sees the Statue of Liberty with its arms out, buried in sand. And that's when Charlton Heston realized that the Planet of the Apes was really the planet of the humans that became the Planet of the Apes because of a nuclear explosion had altered everything. But it was called the Forbidden Zone because it was the history of the planet. The history of America is the Forbidden Zone. Because if we ever go into the Forbidden Zone of American history and fix the narrative, then it's going to force us to have to repair Black people, because then you understand why Black people are tethered to the bottom.
Yeah.
And they don't want to study that. They don't want to look at that.
So Mitch McConnell's attack on exploring, revealing, discussing our history, which is troubled, obviously, is part of the dynamic to keep that information buried because there are consequences to the status quo.
And when John Conyers first introduced H.R. 40,
reparations bill,
1988, 89, something like that, when he first introduced it, H.R. 40, and listen to it, it's called H.R. 40, 40 acres and a mule. H.R. 40. It wasn't talking about writing a check to Black people. It was just a bill to study
They didn't even want to study it.
They don't want to study it because it's too incriminating.
Yeah.
It's too revealing. It's too damaging. If you can't study it without understanding why Black people are what, you know. I was with the wonderful mayor of Shively today. She mentioned you, by the way.
Yes.
Mayor Burton.
Yes. Reverend Chester Burton.
Yeah, we went over to the street where the Wade's house was in Shively. And they got a historical marker in which that house was dynamited in June of 1954, man. Just because they wanted to have the opportunity to move into a predominantly white neighborhood. They got run out. Well, that meant they didn't have the opportunity to develop and accumulate wealth, because most wealth is in your homes, and Blacks' wealth is something you pass down intergenerationally. So we were locked out of wealth.
Let me do an aside there. I just have to. You see, you brought it up. I can't help it. Another part of that story of Andrew Wade was that the police department would not defend them, left them bare to those who wanted to take it the rest of the way, right? And I'm proud to say that my father was among a group of African-American men, and some white men were in that too, that stood guard with shotguns in front of that house and dared anybody to come to their house a second day. And that's a part of history that's not told. I know it because I lived it. Wade came to our home with, there's a lot more to that history. I don't want to get to the side, but you got me going on that one. But there's so much history, but it gets to this history because it reflects that it's not like we just laid around out here and just took abuse. We were, to the best we could, defending ourselves in that regard. But let's get back on track just a second. Your point is, and I think it's a very valid point, is that if it threatens the myth upon which those who assume superiority, that have gained position, that want to maintain accumulated wealth and all that, then it negates the basis upon which they acquired all that. I guess that is a threatening thing to someone that recognizes it.
And I would even go a step further. You are a legislator. You're a legislator. What you do is of critical importance. I mean, to me, politics is everything. I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
If we're going to pray for good politics.
It's all political.
Politics, was it Harold Laswell Yale said, politics is determining who gets what, when, and how. And who gets what is what politics is all about. And Gerald,
exactly what it is.
But as important as you are, let me say something else that's even more important than what you do. And I can't think of anything more important than what you do. Anything.
Well,
but as important as politics is, there is something more sacrosanct to white America than politics. It's social constructs.
The social construction of reality.
The social construction of reality is more important than politics. And the social constructs which says you are different, which maximizes differences, which attempts to maximize differences through legislative decisions, judicial decisions, and ideology, which has taken place for 400 years. We are in the middle of a social construct, and politics can reform it, but it will never transform it.
Because by definition, it is a maintenance tool.
It's a tool. Who was it that said you cannot use the master's tools to bring down the master's house.
Right.
So it's a social construct that we're dealing with. And what destroys social constructs is new constructs. Deconstruction, reconstruction. You got to deconstruct this whole construct of white supremacy and white exceptionalism. If whites are exceptional, it's because they've been given exceptional opportunities that have been deprived of us.
Yeah. Well, let's wrestle with that some more. I see right now we're gonna have to do some more of this because we've gotten deep into some really deep subject matter. But the reality to me is that is what is. The question is, how do you navigate? How do you transform its missions, or how do you convince those who manipulate those tools that there's a better reality that we all can benefit if we're going to live up to that? Now, that may be a pipe dream to some, but the reality is that there's not an option.
Right.
There's really not an option. It must be engaged. It must be confronted. And we can't just talk about it. We have to engage it. We have to do it. But let's get back to Simmons just for a second. Thank you for that. But see, you really hurt yourself there, because I'm going to have to ask you to come back so we can get deeper into that discussion. So what are the programs at Simmons? What are the programs that you think are central to what Simmons does?
Well, we have, in terms of degree offerings.
In terms of degree offerings,
I think that
are even your support programs. Like there may be programs that prepare your students. They're not degree offerings, but they prepare your students to be better students and to engage that educational process.
Well, the wraparound services are critical for student life. And I had to first get the ministers to recognize that you have a jewel here. It's a jewel. It's a hidden jewel. It was a hidden jewel in plain sight. Mm-hmm. So helping the ministers understand, look, this is not some parochial Bible college for a group of older clergymen. This is a school, a college, a university, and now an HBCU. So I was able to convince the clergy of that thereon. And it is of critical importance that the Black community as a whole make Simmons their primary mission. This is not about Kevin Crosby. I'm not going to be the president much longer. I will pass it on, hopefully a better school that I received 16 and a half years ago when I became the president. But the Black community's future, to a great degree, is predicated on how well Simmons does. And we should be proud that we are one of only a few cities in America that has a historical Black college and university. There's only 101 of them. There are 35,000 cities in America, 35,000. So that means that only 0.0008% of the cities in America have an HBCU. Brilliant scholars are relocating to Louisville now. I've got scholars, I'm meeting one tomorrow for breakfast. I have a scholar who's coming in June, who's wrote a book on the roots of racism in America. Brilliant white scholar, part of the LBJ school at the University of Texas, who's coming and will be a scholar in residence at Simmons College. All these brilliant minds are now coming to the school. Students from across the country. I think maybe 50% of our students are out-of-state students. And the reason why is because when they look at Simmons, they say, oh my God, objectively, they say, this is a great school. Many people in the local community look at Simmons through the lens of a Bible college because they've got those prejudices and biases that have been baked into their minds because of a false narrative. Simmons not only is bringing scholars and Black students to Louisville, Simmons is an important economic engine for the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky, because we are bringing millions of dollars into this state because we are an HBCU. And there are monies that are set aside just for HBCUs. I can't go into how much we have received, but yeah. I'm saying millions.
Yeah, but let me take you here though. Let me take you where I'm headed though. So you're providing. You started off a liberal arts school. It got narrowed with that lifeline, that essential lifeline. But what it represents today is a liberal arts school, live and well and growing, with solid liberal arts programs that are available for students in this community and beyond.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yes, go ahead.
And it is a Black institution.
Yes.
And by that, I mean, it is Black governed institution. Blacks are in governance. And you have a trustee board made up of prominent Blacks from across the country. The National Baptist Convention of America is in Louisville today. It's almost like you're going back to the way when we were developing at the turn of the 20th century, when Nannie Helen Burroughs was here. She was here because the National Baptist Convention was here in Louisville.
Yeah.
And now they have returned back to Louisville, and Dr. Tolbert out of Lake Charles, Louisiana, is now the chairman of the board. And their focus across the country is to send students to Simmons. And we have it right here in our city.
I think it's very important what you're saying here. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Tolbert, but I also had the pleasure of getting somewhat of the vision of where Simmons was headed. Would you talk about that a little bit in terms of what are your immediate plans and what do you project in terms of Simmons?
I project that over the next 5 years, Simmons will be probably one of the fastest growing colleges, predominantly white or historically Black, in America. We are laying the tracks, and we just got a few more tracks to lay. A big train is getting ready to come.
So that tells me there has to be physical development and growth to house expanding programs and offerings.
Correct. Our goal is to build multiple buildings, a nice student center there. The National Baptist Convention of America is going to build their national headquarters on the campus of 7th and Kentucky. It will be the hub of already we've been having annually annual book reefs in which we've been bringing in the leading scholars all across the country to do to address issues important to the Black community, which is what an HBCU should do. An HBCU should be a research institution that is doing scholarly, in-depth research on everything that affects the Black community. That's what we should be. We should have the greatest minds in America at Simmons College of Kentucky, speaking to the critical issues that affect the Black community. From a scholarly point of view. And that's what Simmons is going to be. And it is in the process of becoming that now.
I have to tell you, what you're talking about really makes me kind of proud. As you were, I did some of my teaching at Simmons in the earlier days and enjoyed the heck out of that. But I have to tell you, at that time, looking at what was happening then, which was solid, which was something that was worthy, which was something that was an educational opportunity for me as well, in just teaching there as a professor there. But seeing what's happening now, I just got to tell you, it's elevating. I mean, it is. what I saw then happening to what I see now and what I see projecting into the future now is like quantitatively and qualitatively different.
Yeah.
The projection is on track. I have to agree with you. I think it is headed to just a significant role, not only as an institution, but its relationship to the community, as you was alluding to. It's going to be a big, big player with respect, not only the Black community, it's going to be a big player in the community at large.
Correct. It really is. And part of it is just the what's called the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Spirit of the times has intersected with Simmons.
Yeah.
Because the racial reckoning that we experienced in 2020 has caused the nation to for whatever reason, and forever, I don't know how long it's going to last, but right now everybody's reassessing the whole issue of race. I don't think it's a momentary moment. I think we have shifted to some degree a paradigm. I think the paradigm has been shifted. And let me explain what I mean by that. I believe that what you're having now with Trump, the Republicans in Florida and Georgia, is a resistance against a shifting paradigm, and they will not win. You have a better chance of telling winter not to come in December than you do.
It's coming.
It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. And part of it's being driven by social media. Black people have a platform in which to share their views. And so when you have a culture that is changing and saying we must now reevaluate how we have treated Black Americans, when you've got an administration in office that is saying, look, we've got to do something for Black Americans, maybe the most progressive administration since Lyndon Baines Johnson. And when you got a vice president who's a graduate of Howard University and HBCU, and HBCUs have always had bipartisan support, but now they're talking about unprecedented dollars that they want to pour into HBCUs. There's debate over infrastructure, but there is no debate over whether or not they're going to give it money to HBCUs. And they're talking about $70 billion to HBCUs. So we're at a good place because we have an HBCU. And Senator, what Louisville has got to recognize, and I think it's dawning on them, we got an HBCU. We've got something that Lexington does not have and can never have. Indianapolis has Lilly. Only God has more money than Lilly. But they don't have an HBCU and never will have an HBCU because an HBCU had to be in existence prior to 1964. Yeah. So we've got an HBCU and all this money going to be coming to our city that Blacks will be in control of.
Let me say this to you. I think you got something else here too. And I have to say I'm impressed by the way this is HBCU. And guess what? A second HBCU has leveraged each other. The way you all are interacting is very sophisticated. I see really good things happening in terms of that relationship. How do you see that? I know Senate Bill 270 sort of created a dynamic, or it created more capacity, at least in terms of what you all are jointly trying to do together. How do you see that?
Well, I think first of all, President Christopher Brown, who is a pastor,
yes,
and is in the National Baptist Convention, also in the same convention,
right,
helped Simmons.
You all understand each other, don't you?
We understand each other. He helped Simmons before he became president of Kentucky State.
Yeah.
So when he became the president of Kentucky State, we already had this kinship, this affinity towards each other. And now we realize that we are stronger together. I want Kentucky State to succeed. I want Simmons to succeed because institutions should facilitate something. You know, the institution itself is not the goal. It's the facilitation of a process.
Exactly.
It's the Black community and our development that's the goal.
Yeah.
And Christopher Brown realizes that, And we're going around. We've been invited to multiple events by Chamber of Commerce, State Chamber of Commerce, local Chamber of Commerce, to talk about HBCUs, because the community, especially those who are the decision makers in our community, just didn't know what an HBCU is. They didn't understand the importance of an HBCU. They didn't know what they had in this community.
Yeah.
And the more they find out, it's just like, what? And that's a wonderful thing, because to be honest with you, this has not been an easy, man, it has been tough. I can't tell you how many times in the early years when we had nothing and I had to go around and beg, can your church give us $1,000 to help us meet payroll?
Stay afloat.
Just to stay afloat. You see the glory, but you don't know the story. I mean, it has been a struggle with those who didn't see the need for a Simmons. So while we're fighting for accreditation, we also had to fight against the discreditation of those in power who said, you don't need an HBCU. I'm talking about people in the highest levels of leadership who fought us, who badmouthed us, who did what Raymond Kent did, poor excuse for a university. It was awful, the things we had to go through, but by the grace of God, we persevered and we did not quit. We did something that has never been done before in American history. Show me a school that loses its property in 1930 and returns back to the buildings it lost in 2007, like 77 years later. Who ever heard of such? To lose everything and then go back and reclaim property 77 years later. Tell me a school that the state destroyed, the major local university destroyed, that was reduced to nothing but a quote unquote Bible college and all its assets gone, but yet stayed afloat, gets accredited. When we got accredited, once we got accredited, we then applied for HBCU status. The Department of Education, when we submitted our name to be an HBCU, they laughed at us and said, "Who are y'all?" I spoke to the president of NAFIO, had me to speak before the presidents of the HBCUs in Hilton Head, South Carolina. They said, "Now I'd like to introduce you to Kevin Crosby, president of Simmons College, Kentucky HBCU." And they scratching their saying, "Who's Kevin Crosby? Who is Simmons?" Because we had fallen off the map, off the radar screen for 70 plus years. And then to come back, get accreditation, hard work with no grant money. Not one philanthropic organization gave us any money. The first grant we received was after we got accredited, and I explained to one of the foundation presidents what an HBCU is, what it would mean, how we're accredited, and they said, "What? I didn't know it." And once they found out, that wonderful foundation called the Gaines Foundation gave us the second largest grant they've ever given to an institution, $2.5 million.
Well, let me say this, if I may, because I think you just said it all. Simmons is poised for the future.
Yes.
And it's clearly a breakthrough. We're going to leave it right there. Our time is running out. I got to thank you so much for the information you've provided here. It's crucial what you provided.
Thank you for all you do.
Well, I appreciate that, but here's the deal. I'm coming back. Okay. I want you to come back.
Okay.
I want to get you and President Brown on here together to talk about that dynamic, the leveraging that's happening there. You know, I graduated from Kentucky State, so I have a connection with both institutions, and I do see what you're talking about. In fact, I can affirm what you have said because I've watched it, and I got to tell you, that's been magnificent work that's been done over there. And laying that foundation, if that foundation was not laid, and I understand part of that foundation, then Simmons wouldn't be in a place to take advantage of the opportunities that's coming forth now. I congratulate you, and I congratulate your staff and your administration on that. And I'm very hopeful about the future. I want to thank you for coming on today.
It's been an honor.
And I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, the last word is go Simmons Nation.
Got it. So God bless you. We'll get back together. And ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it. You've heard it, as they used to say, from the horse's mouth, where Simmons came from, the struggles that it's faced, what it is planning to do, or it is preparing to take into the future. It's expanding interaction and relationships with other institutions and significant individuals and dynamics. I think something big and bold is about to happen, and I can't wait to see it unfold. And I bet you can't either. So thank you for viewing today. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Reverend Crosby. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for joining us today. We'll see you again.
Thank you, sir. Been my honor.